Hello everyone and welcome to today's Facebook Live class, Working with Anger Using Embodied Processing. A big thank you for everyone for joining us today. Would love to hear in the comments where you are listening from. We've already had a few people comment there. Thank you so much. We love the interaction as we go along today. We're going to be covering obviously a lot to do with anger, how it shows up, the misperceptions that society has around this emotion, and how to actually, find out that the triggers to begin to work with and how we can do that in a safe and effective way. Just having a look at the comments here. Kelly Leonard, great to have you along. I've seen you on the last few lives. Love your interaction, love your energy. Jody, on the way back from Merimbula, hoping the service holds out. Yeah, me too, Jody. Great to see you as always. Olivia, hello from the Gold Coast. Catherine, hello from New Zealand. And we've got someone from Sydney. Fantastic. Looks like we've got a bit of a spammer in the comments as well. So please don't click that link. I've already blocked one user just before we went live. So please don't click that link that someone's posted in the comments. Just ignore them and I'll have them blocked as well.
Don't unless it's from one of our admins.
Exactly.
Center for Healing admin.
Yeah. That's a good sign. We're getting spammed. It was bound to happen sooner or later. So
Yeah.
I'll take it as a compliment.
The audience grows and the hackers
I'm not going to get angry at the spammer. Hello from Fraser Coast, Queensland, New Zealand, Victoria, Sydney, Adelaide, South Australia. So good to Total Somatics. Oh, I like that name. That's fantastic. First live, happy to be here. Great to have you here, Leanne, and we hope we can add value in what we're talking about there. Melissa, if you are watching the live, can you delete that spammer and those comments, please? Like I said, don't click at anyone, and we will get into today's topic. So, before we jump into the slides and all that we're going to talk about today, I thought that, we would talk about why we're talking about anger in this live. And myself and Matt, for those of you, who don't know us, we're the creators of the modality Embodied Processing. And in our community, we have practitioners all around the world now, an amazing student community of amazing souls. And, we obviously get a lot of questions and comments based on the training where we cover all things, the human experience, emotions, addictions, subconscious mind, working in the body, building a resource, trauma of all different types and the effects of trauma. And, in our community, we run these support calls once a month where we're basically go through the questions from the community in the month prior. And we are then, speaking about it on a Zoom call. And the topic and the emotion that has come up in the last few years more than any other is the topic of anger. People who are having trouble holding that emotion within themselves, people who are having trouble holding that emotion when another person is angry, people dealing with the suppression of anger. So we thought it would be a great topic to jump into today. So Matt, you excited to talk about anger?
Yeah, anger's one of my favorite topics to talk about, actually.
Fantastic. We've got another one from Melbourne. David watching with his kids. Awesome, David. Great to have you here. Someone from the UK at 1 a.m. I love that commitment. Good stuff. Love it. All right, let's jump into the slides here. So first, we want to set a little bit of context around anger itself. And I guess we want to talk about what is anger. Anger, we've got some dot points here. So necessary emotional feedback. As human beings, we are emotional creatures. We have all these emotions for a reason, be it anger, fear, sadness, guilt, hurt, joy, excitement, all of that kind of stuff. They're very, very necessary to give us feedback on what's happening in our immediate environment to get us to take some sort of action. So emotions, when we're properly integrated and our emotional system is working in a healthy way, we get this great feedback through that system in our body where we can start to take action in our life that's going to move us towards our greatest good. Now, for most of us, and we all have this going on to a degree, we have a lot of emotional baggage, suppressed emotions, undealt with traumas from the past, undigested life experiences. And so our perceptions get a little bit skewed at that point. So our feedback system kind of gets a little bit off. And certain situations that may have made us angry or sad or fearful in the past, we may have some overreactions to those. So we want to think about emotions as, feedback from our system. They're there to assist us. A lot of us look at things like anger and other of these, what we would label negative emotions. We would look at them and say, well, these are bad. I don't want these. But they're all working in our favor if we are open and willing to work with them and not be adversarial with them. And that's what a lot of us do. And I know I did that for most of my life. It's trying to, push away, fight against, neglect, not acknowledge all of these emotions that didn't feel good. in an effort to just feel good all the time. And my God, that is a strategy that does not work particularly well. Anything you want to say about that, Matt, or any other points on this slide?
Like anger, it's like there's a few different sorts of like anger, or it's the same underlying energy, but the way it can show up differently. And one way it can show up is just a clean no. Like that's not okay. Say like when your child's doing something and crossing someone's boundaries or hitting his sister or something, you can come in with a firm no, and you might feel anger in that moment. That behavior is not okay. Then there's another kind of anger, or another way anger expresses itself where it's like, no, you little shit, like this. It's almost like there's something wrong with you, it's saying. And when anger's clean, when anger's allowed and expressed in a healthy way, in an integrated way, then it's just clean, no, that's not okay. End of story, it's picked up, it's put down the moment, it's over. But then the other kind of anger, it's kind of like it's far more personal, it's like there's something wrong with you. It's almost like, no, stop doing that and I hate you, and there's something wrong with you. And I think a lot of the time, our experience with each other is, when we disagree with each other, disagree with other humans and we argue about things, it means also not just anger and the fact that we disagree and we might be saying no to each other, but it also means the withdrawal of love and connection. And I think that's where the negative kind of connotation or negative relationship to anger comes in, is, we find it difficult, especially if it was never modeled to us, to express anger and to handle conflict and disagreements and set boundaries and all that, because doing those things meant the withdrawal of love. It meant that kind of that stab in the guts, and so there's a big difference between an anger that's kind of compensating for a sense of weakness and helplessness in ourselves, where it's like, so we lash out and it got a very, very personal kind of venom to it, versus an empowered anger, an empowered no. And the way to work with it is to go right into it, to start to learn to experience it, to contain it, to feel it on a sensation level, to feel it in the body. How we start to transform or transmute this kind of venomous reactive anger to just a powerful sense of, it's like a presence, a powerful sense of presence. Like, no, that's a boundary, and it's backed energetically by anger, that firm kind of strength, it's like strength, inner strength. And I think a lot like that inner strength and personal power you've got there, zest for life, I think that's what's lacking, in a lot of us. And like there's, there can be so many negative consequences from that. We can live in a state of perpetual anxiety because we don't feel boundaried, because our anger's not integrated, because we feel so helpless, and we find it really difficult to set boundaries. And then, the mental health living in that state, it's like we're constantly being walked over, we're constantly people pleasing, we don't know how to say no, we're constantly trying to avoid conflict. So we end up like in this hyper aroused state, walking on eggshells wherever we go. And no wonder we end up, with anxiety and self-loathing and all of that sort of stuff. I find anger one of the most powerful things to work with people, if they can really start to allow themselves to change their relationship to it.
Yeah, really well said, Matt. And like you said, it's all about this setting and respecting of boundaries. And that's why we have that emotion. When a boundary is breached, we can use the emotion, use our personal power to maintain that boundary. And then, like Matt said, he spoke when you started talking then, it's like anger without the narrative. And that's when anger becomes very destructive. And a lot of what society has seen is this destructive side of anger, a very unintegrated anger. It's anger with a very, very strong narrative to it. So, if me and Matt were talking and we just met each other and you were right in my face, kind of yelling and talking right in my boundary there, then I could just say to you, can you back off? And back off. And then that's it, right? And if you're encroach the boundary again, back off. But what happens, a lot of us, we either won't say that, so we'll suppress the anger, or we'll say, back off, and then I'll create all these stories around who Matt is, what he is in the world, how he's bad, and then myself as well, I'm good, creating this other. You spoke about the people who have different opinions to us. But then what we see more often than not is a fawn response, which we're going to get into more as we move along. And, so many people that we've worked with over the years have had this people pleasing, and I had it for a lot of my life as well, this people pleasing trait, which comes from a real shutdown of integrated anger. And so we don't have those boundaries set. We're not maintaining them. We're saying yes to everyone, saying no to ourselves. And it's not like the anger goes away. The anger just gets pushed deep within. And so we mightn't show our anger or anything to another person, but we just stew on it internally, and we create all these stories. And then we end up getting so angry at ourselves and other people that anger starts to become resentment. And resentment is just such a poisonous state to be in, because we can start to manifest so many issues from that state of resentment and suppressed anger that we can obviously run into a lot of mental health issues. We lean on addictions to try and escape from that feeling. We can start to manifest physical symptoms in the body. Many studies coming out now showing the link between resentment and cancer. All of this can start to show up when we're stewing in that state of anger and resentment. So I've put there a sympathetic emotion. What that means is basically, when we're looking at from a nervous system point of view, anger is essentially an uprising emotion. That's why it's really can be really great to work with, especially early on in someone's journey, because it's like uplifting. Think about sadness or hurt and these kind of things. They're more of a depressed or parasympathetic emotional state. But anger really is. There's a power to it. Like, people have done amazing things working off anger, or revenge, which is a form of anger, frustration, rage, all of these kind of things. So there's definite power to it, like Matt alluded to. And what we're going to talk about is we get into integrated anger. When we start to integrate anger and start to channel that energy, all of a sudden our zest for life can start to just, hit levels that it's never hit before. And it's all due to the fact that we've integrated anger, not banished it to the recesses of our mind.
Yeah, and that requires us to learn to feel it without trying to get rid of it. Because if we're trying to feel it to get rid of it, then we're still in a dysfunctional relationship to it. So, inquiring into our relationship to anger, it's that's foundational.
And there's very good reasons, why we have these perceptions around anger. We'll get into a little bit about our parents' relationship to our anger and their relationship to their own anger. But there's also overall, society's perception. The cultural soup that we're born into has certain beliefs around anger. And based on, what we have seen and what other people have seen growing up, they have this idea that anger is a destructive force, which it absolutely can be, but that's not all that it is. It's to be feared. Anger is to be feared both in ourselves and in other people. Ugly, that's a big one. It was a lot of females that I've worked with and have come into our community have had this conditioning that that's definitely an emotion that is more masculine and a woman shouldn't show. Okay, and that leads once again to more and more suppression of a very necessary emotion. It's seen to be negative. It's unpredictable, and it can be, but that's not all that it is. So society sees this both suppression and overexpression. So when we get to integration, that kind of sits in the middle of these two extremes that we talk about. So there's the suppression of anger, where we push down, push down, push down. We don't want to let anyone see us angry because we feel we're not going to be accepted in that state. Or the other side of the coin is this overexpression, where anger is just, it's always at the surface, ready to be coming out, and someone's going to cop it. And that's when anger has more of a fight response attached to it. And that's the person that, if as soon as you start to push their buttons, you don't do the dishes, you don't take the bin out, whatever it is, they'll fly off the handle because they're stuck in an overexpression. So both of those are two sides of the same coin, which is a very dysfunctional relationship to anger.
And they'll play out like within a relationship. Someone will be in the suppression and be fawning, and the other person will be in the dominating, controlling, reactive rage. And that ends up as like these relationship patterns of victim perpetrator. Both are two sides of the same trauma response. Both are falling into different responses in the moment. And like, just to the society's perceptions, like, the fear of anger is the fear of violence. On one level, like, we fear that destructive potential, and like, a lot of beliefs play into that, especially like within the spiritual community. Like, it's not spiritual to get angry, and like, we get this image of like, the Buddha sitting in a lotus position, constantly calm, like there's no kind of emotional reactivity to environmental
Letting
stimuli.
Maya shoot arrows at him and not caring.
Yeah, just touching the ground, like and so there's all these perceptions around anger and why it's bad, but a lot of the time, it's not like when they're not peaceful because their anger's been integrated, but they're peaceful because of these beliefs suppressing anger. So or it's more like they appear to be peaceful, but really, like, different parts of their psyche have just been suppressed. And like it also comes back to not only that fear of violence, but like the fear of excommunication. Like, if I get angry at someone in the tribe, this like ancient kind of real survival primal roots. If I get angry at someone in the tribe and there's conflict, I risk excommunication, and then excommunication is considered a fate worse than death. It's like being kicked out of the tribe. If I speak up, if I use my voice, if I become like an autonomous, sovereign individual and who stands in my power, in a sense, like we've left that cultural conditioning. And when anger is really integrated, that's kind of what happens. We start to stand in our own true shoes. We start to stand in our own power when anger is transmuted into power, or as Almas Hamid Ali would say, into strength essence. When it's revealed as our strength essence, then we really are standing in our own true shoes. We're autonomous, and that, like, as we start to reach that point, we can start to feel like that fear of excommunication start to come up, like I'm leaving the tribe, and that has really deep roots as well. These are more existential kind of beliefs and resistances to anger, but it really does run deep. It's not just in our current society.
Yeah, and it's very rare that there are people that stand in their own two shoes in our society today. And what it does, that this is, like Matt said, one of the resistances to working on anger, or where someone can start down the path and get a little bit tripped up, is it will the black cat in the background.
Yeah.
It will glitch in the matrix.
Yeah.
It will cause an upheaval existentially in somebody's life. If we talk about, the relationship dynamic, if all of a sudden I start to integrate anger and I'm not going to be, fawning anymore, and I want to stand in my own two shoes, then the dynamic of that relationship completely changes. It can be a family dynamic. It's a family dynamic. If I'm the one who, has to sort everything out in the family and organize things, and I get told what to do when I never express my own needs, then all of a sudden, if I start to work on that and I do express my needs, then there is a massive shift in the dynamic of the family. And other people, we all do this very much unconsciously. We don't like shifts in a dynamic because we like predictability playing out
Yeah.
in those different dynamics. So that can be a little trap along the way, I guess.
We risk abandonment as well if we don't fawn. And like, especially if in childhood our anger was met with shaming and resistance and the withdrawal of love. If I get angry as an adult and I go to set boundaries, with people I'm in relationship with, we're risking being abandoned. We're risking being left on our own. If I was locked in my room as a child when I had an outburst, that's being left on my own. That's being abandoned when I felt anger. So, and there are genuine consequences to setting boundaries. Like someone's family could fall apart if they're in a codependent relationship with their partner, their spouse, then, and they start setting boundaries and saying no to certain behaviors, their partner may not like that and might end up leaving. So there's very real reasons why people don't, and would just rather stay in the patterns. And this is where it comes back to that excommunication, losing the tribe, standing in our own two shoes, becoming an individual, like a sovereign, autonomous presence, within ourselves. And so, like, it's like there's so many factors to this, because you come for an EP session and start to feel your anger, but then you go back into your relationship and you continue to play out that pattern, and then you come back to an EP session and you start to release some of your stored anger and start to feel it and integrate it, but then you go back into your relationship and play it out again. And so we can end up in this loop. And so it's looking at, like the different beliefs, understanding why we won't set a boundary, what happens if I set a boundary, what's the worst thing that could happen if I set a boundary. And there's a fear there, fear of maybe being left alone, a fear of, like, losing your family, falling apart. If it's at work and your boss treats you like shit, setting a boundary with him might mean the loss of income, which might come back to a survival fear. So there's like, the human unconscious is this vast network of associations and images and different fears and overcoupling emotions and sensations, and like that ties into the overcoupling, because then our survival instinct is overcoupled with our fear of anger. So anger itself is the trigger. So then when our anger gets triggered, we instantly fall into a fawn, instead, because the fawn's perceived as safer.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I was just reading a couple of comments. Someone wrote, and thanks so much for sharing. I'm always angry trying to suppress it. And that language is amazing, because what happens, we get to this point where we're unconsciously suppressing our anger, and then we may start to become conscious of it. But now we end up, because it takes a lot of work. We're not doing it consciously. We're not like, anger's coming up, let me push it back down with my hands. We kind of have these inner hands Singer talks about, which I like that term, where as soon as it starts to come up, we'll just push it down on a very unconscious level. But that takes energy. It takes energy to push down this sympathetic emotion and keep it down there. And so many people, so much of society have got this pushed down for years, for decades. Okay, so it's taking energy every single day to keep this stuff down and keep yourself in check, or keep it together, whatever you want to say. And that's why, people can have these emotional outbursts from time to time, because they get so worn out that there's no mechanism anymore, or the mechanism's too tired. And so, 20 years of anger can come out in a single instance until we put it all back in again. Okay, because normally it was met with non-acceptance at the time. And so it's worth, as we talk about this diagram here a little bit, we had on the previous slide, the relationship to anger in childhood. So it's worth, you can reflect and say, well, the emotion of anger when I was younger, how was that met by my parents or caregivers? Because what can happen, that relationship will set a blueprint as we move through life as to how anger, or the unconscious responses that happen with anger, moving forward. And Matt spoke about, at the end of the day, it all comes back to a survival response: abandonment, loss of income, not going to be able to feed myself. All of this stuff is very much survival based, and it was survival based when we were a kid, yet we're all just grown up kids as an adult at the end of the day. That's where our programming comes from. And so what can happen, whenever someone was angry, if they were put in time out immediately and say, go away. And, like, I love Jordan Peterson, but that's one part of his recommendation that I cannot agree with. If a kid's angry, put them in another room until they've dealt with their anger and they can come back out. That's just pure abandonment. The person that is meant to love and care for you the most does not accept you in this emotional state. Okay? So that means attachment is threatened. Attachment equals survival to a child. So what happens at that point, we develop these adaptations, that we call them, into our emotional system, into our nervous system, where we start to shut down anger, because anger is not safe, because that means I'm going to be abandoned, I'm not going to be accepted, and my attachment is going to go away, which is very much survival based to me. And so what we do, we develop what is called overcoupling, or even undercoupling, where anger is often linked with some other emotions or states. So Matt, do you want to maybe talk about the overcoupling, and I can talk about the under one another time? So maybe when anger comes up and we have that fear coming over the top.
Sure, like like the example of being left in our room, like go to your room when you're angry. Then what happens is, as you said, our attachment is threatened, and our parents are our source of survival when we're young. Without our parents, our nervous system knows I won't survive without my parents. So that's then, anger then becomes the threat to my survival, because it's the threat to my attachment. Because love and attachment are just as much survival needs as food and water for children. Like they did a study with babies. If you don't pick up a baby, like if you have a baby in an incubator, and it gets all the nutrients and water that it needs, but you never touch that baby will die. And that's because that attachment, that need for holding, feeling held, feeling attached to someone, it's a survival need just as much as the food and the water. So take that away, it doesn't matter whether they get the food or the water. And when you go to your room, that's taking that away in that moment. It's taking away that attachment, that nurturing, that holding, and that love. And then what happens is I get an unconscious association that anger is a threat to my survival. That's why it can be really difficult to, resolve this, because it's survival patterning. It goes right down through the lower quadrants of our brain into our more primal areas. That's where this is patterned. And, so then what happens is my anger is overcoupled with fear or terror, survival terror. So then they're linked together. So every time anger comes up, I will then experience terror and then shut down. So a lot of people, come to me, I don't get angry, I don't feel anger, because their instant reaction is before their anger even surfaces. It's just like even the slightest bit, their nervous system will go into a shutdown. And so it all becomes overcoupled and kind of velcroed, glued together. And, like it's important to kind of discern the different emotions and uncouple them, start to feel them one by one, integrate them. I remember when I was working with my anger, I would have like spurts of rage, but then I would have terror, like I'm gonna die if I fully feel this. I remember being keeled over with this big knot in my stomach, like of terror, having to kind of learn to stay with it, bit by bit, like dipping in and out of it. And eventually it was like that knot released, that terror, and I was able to start to feel my anger. And so it's like, things started to uncouple, like, it's like everything was mixed together and getting a comb and straightening it all out. Everything was knotted and entangled, and over time I was able to start to get that comb, straighten it out, and feel one thing at a time instead of this big ball of overwhelm that I would go into anytime someone would raise their voice or anything.
Yeah, and
Just
that's
from
that's such an important point, and I love that metaphor because a lot of people, when they come into doing work like embodied processing or some sort of modality similar, it's like it can be very confronting. It's like I've got all of these kind of emotions all in my face. They all seem to be happening at once. My body's going crazy, and all of this, and that's why it's important when we have a practitioner who understands that terrain. Then they can start to, like Matt said, use the comb and smooth it out. It's okay, we've got this anger here, and then we have this fear and this shutdown response over the top. We're going to start to notice the difference between the two, and then we're going to notice the point when the shutdown starts. And that's different for everyone. As soon as the anger gets to like a 1 out of 10 intensity, then that might be enough for a shutdown response for someone. It might be like 6 out of 10. It's like whatever the nervous system deemed this anger to become not safe as a response, that's when it'll shut down. That's what it was adapted to. So you think like, maybe someone had a childhood where their mother or father was flying off the handle all the time and they had a lot of anger, like over expression, then for that child, it probably the fight response, fighting back probably wasn't a good strategy. Okay, so the nervous system learned that and go, no, it's much more safer for my survival if I shut down and fawn here until they calm down, and then I can start to maintain attachment again. So you can see how kind of all this programming starts.
and it might have been like I fall into helplessness and then I get mum's attention. So dad rages and then I go into helplessness and then I get mum's attachment. That maintains an attachment to mum. And so it's whatever best serves survival. That's the way we get programmed and wired. And, developmental trauma, I heard it defined by Lawrence Heller, and it's a beautiful definition. It's exactly what I would agree with in it. That's developmental trauma is when parts of the personality or the whole personality becomes oriented around survival. So it's anywhere in our development where our development's arrested and we have to adapt to our environment. So everyone's got this, to varying degrees. That's why we say trauma is like a universal experience, because we've all got undigested life experiences and ways we adapted to survive. But some people, it's like their whole personality becomes oriented around survival. And, working with trauma, it requires us to kind of gain insight and understanding into these patterns and learn to feel these emotions. So, for someone who, feeling anger is a terrifying emotion, we have to titrate and do that bit by bit. It doesn't work to have, to go and do like a ceremony and have some huge emotional release of anger. That can, I'm not saying don't do that, but what I'm saying is that doesn't resolve the issue. You might express your anger in that moment, drink ayahuasca or do a breathwork session and have all this anger come up and move it through. That can be helpful to start to empty out the nervous system, but that doesn't mean this pattern's changed. It doesn't mean you know how to contain anger. It doesn't mean you can stay connected to your own sensations when you're experiencing anger in relationship. It's similar to what I was saying earlier about, coming for an EP session, but then falling back into your pattern as soon as you get into a relationship, because these are relational patterns, So just like a purge or a spew of somatic stress won't do it. It takes learning to stay present, to stay connected, and to stay within, associated in my experience, in the marrow of my experience as my anger starts to come up. And that's something where we have to titrate. We have to learn to come in and out. It's like acclimatizing to water. If I just throw in the deep end, have this big release, and then get pulled out, I'm not acclimatized to water. Water's the anger. My relationship to the water hasn't changed. So as we're helping a client move in and out of it, titrating contraction expansion, moving in and out slowly over time, they start to change their relationship to anger. They start to feel more comfortable when their anger arises, and things start to uncouple, things start to integrate. It's not something that's just going to go boom. I've integrated my anger. It's like, I've had people come to me and say, I've integrated my anger in a breathwork session like 2 years ago. It's like, like, okay, like you had a transformative experience, but that doesn't mean anger is integrated, and so, like, because these happen, these types of patterns are set up in early childhood. Like I say, this is a lifestyle. It's something we have to learn to live. It's not about just fixing something that's broken.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a whole adaptation or adaptation. I'm not sure what the word is, but
Yeah,
it's that process.
repat.
Repatterning. Yeah, that's right. And just a couple of comments. Someone wrote, Matt's way of stomping with your child. We've started doing this and it's powerful. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, we did a full class on trauma informed parenting. If you want to check that out, centerforhealing.com/blog. But yeah, we talk about there ways that we can be with our children's anger without trying to shut it down, or also setting our boundaries as well. And there's a really delicate balance there. And
Yeah.
someone else has written it's also about trying to protect the child, because your anger is going to explode through. Yeah, so that's right. I mean, parenting is just the biggest trigger for us. There's relationship and then parenting, and then, like Matt said, they're very relational. And I know for me, I dealt with layers of anger many years ago, and then having my son, a whole new set of layers came up, frustrations, and it's like, so in those moments, one of the things we talk about in that other class is like, we're never going to get this perfect. Parenting's really fucking hard. So like that whole idea of perfect when it comes to this stuff is just, it doesn't apply. But in those moments, it's like, hey, suppression is a better tactic for me as a parent, as opposed to the overexpression and going off at my kids. But then we use that as information. So as that was the situation for me, I was getting very, very frustrated. So I started to work through that and realize, for me, it was this still trying to have some sort of control, trying to control life, have other people act in a certain way. And that was showing up greatly with my son. So then that was my responsibility at that point to start to peel back those layers and go through that process. So, parenting is a wonderful mirror for this stuff. Absolutely. And so Matt spoke about obviously when we can be overcoupled, so there's anger and there's some states over the top, overcoupling it. We can also have it the other way around, where anger is actually the emotion over the top, mainly for sadness, hurt, can be fear as well, but mainly for sadness and hurt. And anger can be sort of a bodyguard in this sense, where we have a tender spot in us where there's some sadness or hurt, and life presents us with a situation where that tender spot is about to be touched, and all of a sudden anger, that the system will deem that it's not safe to feel the sadness and the hurt, because at the time the sadness and the hurt was stored, we didn't have the capacity or the skills to be with it. Now later on as an adult, we still feel like that child, we revert back to them or whatever age they were. So anger steps in and says, don't worry, it's not safe to feel that, let me step in and take care of things. That's why it's kind of like a bodyguard in that aspect. So anger can show up in that way as well, where it's trying to cover up and protect that tender spot of the sadness and hurt. So these are just some different ways that anger can be melded with other emotions.
Helplessness as well, like feeling out of control. Anger can step in as an attempt to compensate, like I was saying at the start, that sense of helplessness, and then reactive anger will step in as a way to try and regain a feeling of being in control. Or control others, and that's when we become, develop like narcissistic traits and stuff, when we start to have this, we have this deep sense of helplessness, and then anger will come in and try and dominate and control other people. So like next topic, when integrated anger, like it's when we've started to metabolize that helplessness underneath, um, our reactive anger, and we start to feel into what those underlying emotions are, the sadness, and we can feel them, because then if we can learn to be with them, and the compulsion isn't to move away and run from them, then our anger starts to transform, because anger can often, a lot of the time, this is in a specific personality type, by the way, our anger was a compensation, a reaction to the sadness and helplessness underneath. So we tried to regain that sense of control. But if we can help someone dip into the helplessness underneath it, and they can be with that, they can feel it, they can start to metabolize it, then their anger becomes less reactive, because they're not unconsciously seeking to get away from those underlying emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, yeah, back to my experience as well. It was, when that came up early on when we had my son, it was like I had to go and do that work on the frustration, which is, anger is the tree, branches, frustration, rage, irritation, all of that kind of thing. So we were, working with the frustration. And as we started to work somatically with that experience of frustration, then all of a sudden that grip of needing to control came up. And then we had to work with feeling not in control, and then the fear that comes from feeling not in control. So it's like we're getting deeper and deeper towards the roots of whatever this frustration or anger was showing up. And as soon as we start to integrate and work through that, then all of a sudden, it took a few months for me of doing this, and then all of a sudden those same situations that would have brought up frustration in me that I was suppressing to try and stay present for my son, would start to not be there. And that's the moments where we know we're starting to integrate, because we're like, oh, this would have really pissed me off, a few months ago. And now I'm able to sit here with sort of, feeling quite clean emotionally inside. And so that's what it is. And personal power, we've got there. No means no. Yes now means something. Obviously, when we're thinking about integrated anger, someone can ask us of something, and if it's not for our best good, we can just go no. Don't need to make excuses. Don't need to make up a story why it's a no. It's just a no. And the beauty then is that our yes means something. Because before, if we weren't saying no to anything and we were saying yes to everyone and everything, then our yes didn't mean anything either, So our yes starts to mean something. More energy is freed up. Like I said, as soon as we can start releasing those hands that are holding down the anger, because we're able to, in the context of a session like Embodied Processing with an experienced practitioner, that's the space for me to start feeling it, expressing it, going through the roots of my anger. Then all of a sudden I start to free that up, and that energy starts to come back to me, which is so good, because so many people are, struggling with energy these days. Can stand
It
in your
becomes
own two shoes. Go back.
that suppressed energy, it becomes available to the system. It can start to move more freely, and our expression becomes less contorted and constricted, and we just become more authentic. Really, like more authentically ourselves. And I remember, so much of my life I was like a chameleon. Whoever I'd hang around, I'd kind of become exactly like them. And looking back, like it was a fawn response. It was the lack of that individuation, that kind of authentic presence, of me. And as I started to work with my anger, it's kind of like, it's like becoming an island in a sense. Not in the sense of like attachment avoidant, but becoming like unique. That's a better word for it. Unique. And think of how often in your own experience will you hide your views, or will you just agree with other people, or will you do something that is kind of self-abandonment? Like, how often do you self-abandon, for the sake of others? And so integrated anger, that personal power, no means no, more energy, like you can just be more yourself, more effortlessly. Like yeah, it doesn't take that kind of willpower to just be yourself. It feels natural,
Yeah.
much more natural.
Yeah, like a weight comes off, this needing to be a certain way. I had this experience a month or two ago. We were on a golf trip in Vietnam, and there was a small group of us. I knew my friend, but the four others I didn't know. And there's only six of us. And, like Matt, I was very much a chameleon as well when I was younger. And, I remember having a discussion on one of the first nights of the trip, and you're going to spend a lot of time with these people over the next week, and you're getting to know them. And one of them brought up a topic, and everyone's like, yeah, and they agreed. And I automatically just said, no, I don't agree with that, and this is why. And, we had a discussion about it. And then I was sat in my bed later that night and I'm like, oh, yeah, back in the day, I would have absolutely just agreed with it because I wanted to maintain some sort of connection and have a good time with them. And it didn't affect the relationship either. And it wouldn't have mattered if it did. But that's what we're
Yeah.
talking about when it's standing in our own shoes. We're not going to abandon ourselves because we feel like the situation deems it. We'll always choose ourselves first and our greatest and best good.
And just to point out, like, the collective issues that come up in regards to this and anger. It's like, saying no around, say, the vaccine meant, like, half of society turned on you. And, like, so our relationship with our parents and the withdrawal of love plays out on a collective level as well. It's like, if I say no and it really individuate in certain social perspectives, it's like we're shamed, we might, like anti-vaxxer, extremist, bigot, all these different kind of words, just because we have a different perspective. And so this is a real collective issue, we've got around anger. It's not so much personal, it's more universal. Like, we can't disagree without withdrawing love, like, without disconnecting. Can't we learn to disagree, and remain connected? It's like, it's easy to say that, and we can see sanely, oh, that's what we should do. We need to have rational conversations about this and learn to just disagree about certain perspectives without fully disconnecting and, like, going to war with each other. But how can we do that when we've got all these survival associations with our anger and, these inner issues, these inner conflicts around our integrity, around our power, around our autonomy, and around other people's autonomy, all these issues around, needing to control people's perspective? How can we have a conversation, around that? It's nice to say that, like, rationally, like, yeah, we need to have a conversation. Why can't we all just kind of get along and agree to disagree? It's like, well, we can't, because there's unconscious forces, like, absolutely driving this conflict. And so, I'm of the perspective, like, we will never solve our social issues externally. We have to solve these unconscious associations within ourselves. And then it becomes natural, much more natural, to have a disagreement and not withdraw, not disconnect. And even if we do have the tendency to disconnect, we have awareness around it. We can notice that compulsion to, like, disconnect, withdraw love, to turn away, and we don't have to act on it. But if we don't have that awareness, then we're just living out these, cyclical patterns, round and round in circles of, like, toxic conflict. And it's happening all over the world. It's really amplified, the past 2 years. And it's, toxic anger playing out, toxic victimhood. I heard Byron Katie say victims are violent people. Because when we're put into a space of helplessness, of being cornered, of being traumatized, then we will lash out. That suppressed rage will come out. And it's happening in all these different cultural issues. But, the solution, in my perspective, would be, learning to work with our own anger, to learn to contain it so our anger is less reactive, it's more integrated. Then we can just say no. You can disagree, that's okay. But this is my space, and this is me.
There's no, really well said, Matt. There's just no us versus them. And that's what this anger that we see, it's all about. That's the main narrative. That's what it'll come back to. Other
Yeah, like
wrong,
the
me
left,
right.
right.
It's
It's
just, it's
insane.
bananas. It's bananas. But like I said, it's not, we can get angry at that unconscious process and those systems in place, but it all starts with us. That's where it
Yeah.
starts. And when enough people start to integrate that anger, then all of a sudden, slowly, very slowly normally, then these cultural constructs can start to swing and start to move in a different direction, or collapse completely. So triggers to work with. So the ways that we can start to, work with anger, I've got 3 ways here. So we can use someone's anger that scares us as like a gateway to start to deal with where our anger, starts to stem from, or the suppression of it, and start to work with it. That can be something in life today. Maybe your boss or your partner, when they get angry, it scares you, and that maybe it was your dad when you were younger, when you were a kid. We can start to use that as a gateway. That's what we're doing when we're talking about triggers. We're looking at a gateway to start to dig deeper. So let's say, I keep using the example of me, but when my son was born, I was getting frustration, in these certain situations. That's not the problem. That's a gateway to the problem underneath. And that's what we're always doing with an orientation like embodied processing. We're always trying to get to the root. We're trying to understand what's really going on under the surface, because that's how sustainable change happens, not manipulating things on the surface. A person or a situation that elicits anger in us. So we're talking about being fearful of another's anger. Now we're talking about a situation or a person bringing up anger in us. We can use that as a gateway. It's like, whenever my partner says this or whenever my mum says this, I just fucking lose it. I can't handle it. That's a great gateway, a great situation to start to explore curiously. And also, we can just go straight for it and just work. And this is what I think me and Matt kind of like to the most. It's like, let's just work with the experience of anger or frustration or rage or irritation itself, and welcome that in. So, anything you want to add there, Matt? And I'll bring up the flow chart here.
Yeah, just like working with the raw energy of anger is powerful, because if we can start to embody and contain the raw energy of anger, it becomes a practice of learning to contain it and embody it in real time. So then, if your son makes you angry and you get rage come up, then you can start to feel it without suppressing it or acting it out. That's the difference. So you're not indulging in it and you're not pushing it away. You're just feeling that raw energy. And it's like it can be intense, like every cell in your body tingling, heat pouring out of your face, like it can be really intense. But we learn to experience that energy. And, the more we experience it, the more we can actually transmute it, that raw energy, into power, as Almas would say, into essential strength. And then, when it gets triggered, it's less and less reactive. We less and less, become act out these kind of compulsive, venomous kind of words and actions and violence and all of that sort of stuff. And it's almost like we're re-owning the energy. We're bringing it back in and holding it, learning to hold it, learning to contain it within ourselves. And like if we were all able to do that, our disagreements would be very different. And then we can actually, only by doing that can we learn to stay connected whilst having a disagreement. And it's a work in progress still for me. I've been doing this constantly, for years. And I think we're ever refining this ability. And this doesn't just apply to anger, it applies to all emotions, all EP work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I put back here, where was it? So that last point, like, you can start to take the keys to your life back, because before that, we're at the whim of everyone and everybody, every other situation. So the world is going around making us angry, making us sad, making us fearful. And so we've essentially outsourced control of our emotional state to everything else outside of us. And as we do this work, we start to gradually take the keys back to our life, where we're like, okay, there's a reason. I'm unconsciously, so it's like, don't beat yourself up, but it's like, I'm making myself angry, I'm making myself frustrated here. Let's start to jump in and work with that, because this certain situation does not warrant me getting angry or frustrated, so there must be something stored within me that's being triggered and brought up in the moment.
And so, like our no then isn't a reaction that's coming from an overcompensation, from a sense of victimhood and helplessness. It's, I feel empowered. It's an empowered no. It doesn't mean we don't say no to our kids. We just sit there and feel that, like that can be helpful rather than acting it out. But we can still say a very firm no, but it comes from a place of empowerment. We're affirming something. We're not negating the child or the person in front of us. Like there's something wrong with you. It's an empowered no. And you can see the difference, like in someone saying no, it doesn't leave damage, it doesn't leave a scar, versus someone, no, there's something wrong with you, and you don't even have to say that there's something wrong with it. It's the energy. It's like
You feel it.
stab, like an emotional stab, like, oh, a big shame, not in the gut, there's something wrong with me, versus like, no, that's not okay.
Yeah, not accepted again, abandoned again.
Exactly. Yeah. Excommunicated, but because you don't have to even send them to the room, it's in the voice, you're abandoned. That's kind of what we're saying. And just with the energy, love is not there in that moment. And so, like we can only say no from that empowered place if our anger is contained and felt within the body in the moment. If it's not, then it's coming from a reaction. If we learn to contain it, and this is something that takes practice, like I was saying, in and out, in and out, in and out, learning, repatterning our relationship to anger. That's why just a big spew won't work in this sense. But if I learn to really feel it, then anger's consciously channeled, not unconsciously reactive. It's consciously chosen in that moment. And you can see like different people like Martin Luther King, he was someone I get the vibe really integrated his anger and used it as a channeled it for social justice and social change. There's different people throughout history, without withdrawing love. Wasn't a reaction, wasn't like you fucking have done the wrong thing, now I'm gonna get you. No, it's completely different energy. And I
I
think it's actually rare,
Yeah, it's very
you
rare.
know
I bring this up so much in the community, so everyone's going to like, oh, he's going to talk about it again. But it's a movie, V for Vendetta. If you want an
yeah,
example of it, you know, in V for Vendetta, Natalie Portman, Matt's like, oh, he's talking about it again. She's this plays this character who is essentially, a fawner, a people pleaser, timid, goes through this whole process where she thinks she's going to die and or whatnot. And she comes out with this as this kind of integrated being. It's great because as she comes out of this cell where she thought she was going to die, she literally walks out in the rain and screams. And then as part of this process, and then right at the end, one of the last scenes, she's about to put the train in drive to full of explosives to blow up Buckingham Palace, and the cop gets down there pointing a gun at her, and he's like, "Take your hand, off that control." And she looks at him, and just goes, "No." And it's such good acting because it's actually the way she says it is like soft and everything, but you look in her eyes and you're like, she fucking means that. There's no way she's going to take her hand off that. So it's a
yeah.
great example if you want to check that movie out of kind of what we're talking
It's
about.
not, the energy of it isn't personal. It's not like, it's just in service of the truth. It's not even in service of me. It's just like the truth. It's like, that's not okay. No.
So before we give a couple of examples here and bring up the flow chart, the orientation we're always taking in embodied processing is all is welcome here. It's a phrase that our practitioners use. It's so powerful. As soon as someone is a practitioner, therapist, whatever you're doing, as soon as you have the energy and orientation of all of you is welcome here, the person can start to relax because they're so worried about being judged. So especially like your anger is welcome here. You may not have felt like your anger is welcome for the majority of your life in any situation where other people are around. Here, it is welcome. Okay. And like Matt spoke about, we're not here to fix you. You're not broken. Your anger doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It's not shame based. Let's just explore it with curiosity. And so without going massively in depth with the whole, EP, the process, one of the things we do up the top here is called resourcing, where we're starting to build a capacity within the client, where we're helping them find some sort of safety, whether it's in the body, a memory, a person, a place, an imagined place, whatever's going to be a best suit for the client. But we're cultivating a sense of safety or support or even just neutrality early on can be very, very beneficial because we come back to that later if the system dips into overwhelm, which with anger, it certainly can. After we do that, well, we work through, we use the examples we brought up before. If we're working directly with the experience of anger or frustration or rage or whatever language the client wants to give it, then we can actually just welcome in that emotion. Sometimes we might need to use a memory or a situation to elicit it, but we start to bring it in. And first of all, we're welcoming it in as if we're inviting it in for tea. We're not here to have a fight with it. Like I said, we're trying to turn around that attitude of having an adversarial relationship to one of curiosity, exploration, and really getting to know that part of us. Because as soon as I don't like my anger, I don't like part of myself. I cannot accept myself for who I am because I'm abandoning certain parts. Now that may be because, like we've spoken about in this whole talk, that part was abandoned when we were younger. Then we grow up and we start abandoning that part ourselves. It's like we take that on just completely as us. And so then
Internalize.
yeah,
Internal.
absolutely. And so, we can start to then see, and the great example that we've brought up already that we see with a lot of people, it's like, okay, let's start to welcome in anger. Where is it in the body? Does it have a color? Does it have a shape? Does it have a density? Is there any images or anything that come up when you think about it? And then we can start to even, turn that up and increase the anger. And the client will notice very often that anger is okay to a certain level, and then it just shuts down completely. Okay. And in that
I
situation,
had
yep.
I had a client once who was, starting to feel his anger, and he said it in different words, but he said, I feel like I just had an erectile dysfunction, like everything just
Everything just
shut
went
back.
flaccid, right? So it's like that sympathetic emotion, everything's energy starting to rise, and then at some point the nervous system goes not safe. So
Yeah,
it's a
and
good metaphor.
that comes like I almost mentioned him a few times today. He talks about where the will and the strength is castrated, by the parents at a certain stage in development, around 3 and 4. If our parent, and this is exactly what we're talking about, it's castration of strength. And it's interesting that he used that metaphor, like I just had an erectile dysfunction, because his will, was castrated, was cut off, his strength by his mother's relationship to that part of him.
Yeah, and then so what we can do, we start to then help the client that all of a sudden now they have this new awareness that, oh my God, I didn't realize that, when my anger got to this level, it would start to shut down. And so what we would do, like, Matt's metaphor is turning the tap on and off. It's like we can go back to a resource. We can start to get a little bit more capacity in the body. Then we can welcome the anger back in again. Then we can start to become really familiar with that nexus point of where the shutdown happens. And as we start to go through this process, might be one session, multiple sessions, the client will invariably start to get different memories and things flashing up of all the times that they had to shut down their anger when they were in their developmental stage. And then they can start to work through that as well. And as soon as that shutdown response is worked through and familiarized, and all of a sudden we can allow ourselves to be angry at mum, dad, guardian, primary school teacher, granddad, whoever it was that we suppressed anger and fawned around, we can start to experience that anger within our body. And so that's another layer deep. And once again, that process can take a while because we might still go into shutdown, still go into fear. But the more we do it in this safe bubble of an EP session, the more we can build our capacity to be with it. And that's what it's all about. This work is not about having our negative, so-called negative emotions go away. It's that we're able to hold them. It's like, I'm angry and that's not okay, or I'm sad and that's not okay. It's too much. I can't deal with it. I'm angry. Work. There's anger flooding through my system, and that's perfectly okay. I have no need to suppress. I have no need to overexpress. I can be completely present with this. Because what happens as we work through the suppression of anger, it's like scales, right? Our capacity is really low and our stored up anger is really high. And so we have a lot of trouble existing in many situations around that. Over time doing this work, we're working through these layers of anger that we've suppressed throughout our life. At the same time, we're growing in capacity. And then at some point, if we keep going and doing this work, then all of a sudden our capacity becomes greater than the amount of anger that's flowing through our system. And at that point, that's when I can start to remain present for it.
Yeah.
And that's when integration starts to happen all by itself. It doesn't have to be in a session because I can have the experience of a session once I've built that level of capacity.
Yeah, I can feel my anger, stay present and connected to my body, to my experience in real time. It's like a moment to moment kind of thing. That's why I say it's a lifestyle. And it's like as our capacity grows, so does our ability to hold it in the moment that it gets triggered up, and so does our ability to then not become reactive. And so like in EP, we're setting the foundations for someone to start to develop that capacity in their real life. And this is why it's like I never say to anyone, like, I'm not going to fix you. That's not like I've got a therapeutic Panadol that you take and then you've got no more anger, because a lot of people go to therapy to try and get rid of these things, but trying to get rid of them, that's still the dysfunctional relationship to them. It's still a dysfunctional relationship, a relationship of rejection, of a self-abandonment, of abandoning these parts of yourself. So that part that wants to get rid of them is the internalized voice of mum and dad, or the internalized voice of grandma, granddad, or whatever it is. That part that says, no, like this part's not okay, developed that belief because of society's relationship to our anger and our parents' relationship to our anger. And so, integrating anger is very different to getting rid of anger. Anger is useful. It's needed. If you get rid of your anger, what are you going to do? Just fawn and not say no, to people? And like a lot of therapies will promise that we'll delete your anger. You won't feel anger anymore. And, people go to those kind of therapies, and then what happens is their unconscious tendency is to then, when anger does arise, suppress it, because they believe that it's gone. It shouldn't be there.
This got deleted. This can't be right. This isn't anger.
Squash it down. So these emotions, they're natural. All mammals have them. Go poke a bear and you'll see anger. Go and try and take a lioness's cubs. You'll see very strong mammalian anger come out. They're natural, and they're very suppressed in our culture. And when they're suppressed, they become toxic. When we're able to stay present, connected, embodied in our experience and stay with the raw energy of it, they don't have to be toxic anymore. They can be, they transmute into different qualities. So this is where EP differs from other kind of modalities.
Yeah, yeah. I once, talk about the emotion of fear I'll bring in, and I once read about there was people they'd done studies on. They were born without an amygdala, so they actually had no fear
Wow.
center, right? And I read the headline of it, and then I clicked through, and I'm like, oh, this sounds great. I'd love to have no amygdala and not be afraid. And then I read the article, and these people basically can't function in society. So
Yeah.
we need levels of these emotion, like we said at the very first slide, to give us feedback. And when they're working healthily, they'll give us correct feedback. We'll get that feedback. We'll move on with our life. We won't create any painful narratives of us versus them, or there's something wrong with me or something wrong with someone else. We just move on with life to the next, situation that the universe is presenting us with. And so, yeah, we never try and get rid of them. David's left a great question about HSPs. We'll get to that at the end. We'll do a little question bit at the end. So maybe just one more example of this process playing out. This is from a client I had a while ago. And so we started to bring in, there's a lot of anger, and this is where anger can be overcoupled with those emotions underneath. So we invited in a part of her that was extremely angry at her father, who had left them when she was a kid and come back into their life as an adult, and she was working for him and whatnot. And she'd, like Matt said about doing things that we think we've worked through in the past. She said, no, I did this journaling exercise 2 years ago and I worked through my anger with him. Yeah, when we brought it up, you could see her body was on fire basically. So I'm like, okay, that's great, but is it okay if we explore it just to see what's going on? And so as we started to experience that anger, and she was getting a firm no to seeing what's underneath it, because we got that once we build a relationship, stop being adversarial. She said, I said, what's the function of this? And she goes, it's to protect. Protect from what? And she goes, no, no. And so we started going back. We were resourcing. We were going back, and then we were dipping back in. And then it got to a point where eventually she was able to say, I said, protect you from what? And she goes, protect me from this. And she just cried for about literally 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And all of the grief of him leaving when they were, kids and everything started to come out. And then we had to integrate that, because that's not, we can't assume that's a one and done. All right, beautiful. She's had that, cry and it's done. And so that has to be then integrated and worked through, in sessions after that as well. But that's an example of getting to know, stop being adversarial with the anger. When it is ready and when the client has the capacity, the anger will step aside to let us know what it's trying to protect. And what happens then, because like I spoke about earlier, that part of the client, literally when they experience the emotion, they revert back to whenever the emotion was stored. And it's like, I don't have the capacity to deal with this because, I was 6 or I was 8 or whatever it is. So it's like that realizing that, okay, no, I'm grown up now. I can deal with this. I do have this capacity. Then we can start to work through these emotions and states. And, I think it was probably Bessel in his book or maybe Porges that said, the loop will be completed and it'll be over once the body realizes that the event's
Yeah.
over. So we
That's
create
all.
distance. Yeah, I'm not going back in time and re-experiencing. I now understand there's a natural timeline there.
Yeah. So there's two parts to this. So there's the discharge of the somatic stress, of the suppressed anger, or grief, underneath it, etc. And we have to discharge that, because otherwise the body is constricted and contorted and dysregulated. So EP will help discharge that suppressed anger from your nervous system, but that that's kind of what I was saying earlier. That's one side of the coin, like it's like we could go and do a breathwork session, or, primal screaming. Every time we get angry, we might need to go and, take ayahuasca or something. I'm not against any of these things, but it's one half of the coin, and I heard, Lawrence Heller put it like, people who do that primal screaming every time they get angry, this applies to all kind of somatic release processes. They become like a sieve, and every time anger comes up or whatever emotion, they have to go and scream into a pillow. And so the opposite side of that is developing capacity, presence, and what we've been talking about, where our relationship to anger changes. And they're missing a key point on this side of just the modalities that just discharge. They're missing that containment aspect. We never learn to contain and hold our experience. And, there's a difference between discharging anger from the past and feeling things that were unfelt and trying to delete emotion as well, and, get rid of anger completely as well. So if we're learning to contain, stay connected, and stay present to it, then we're healing on a much more fundamental level in a much more integrated way. We're not just trying to discharge anger every time it comes up, but anger's rather integrating, unifying back into the self structure, back into who we are, and that's when we can start to become much more authentic. Otherwise it can, someone we disagree with, it's like, or is doing something, we start to feel like anger, we go scream into a pillow but still don't say anything. So it's I'm just trying to point out that, like there's two sides to the EP process. One is that capacity, containment, presence, connection, growing in our capacity, resourcing. The other side is the somatic kind of discharge of stored and stuck stress in the nervous system.
Yeah, and then we get the chance, something that we talk about in level 2 a lot, is we start to reclaim the qualities that were lost in the abandonment or suppression of that emotion. Because it's like, well, I suppressed my anger because it stopped me from hurting other people, stopped me from hurting myself, meant I could keep my job, I was able to stay in a relationship and all that. But we don't realize we also abandon our personal, all the stuff we spoke about, standing in our own two shoes, our no meaning no, being more authentic. We also abandon our energy and zest for life. We also abandon all of that. So we're rebalancing our perception as well around this emotion, and we're seeing the whole picture instead of a sliver, which is a big part of this process. So there's some examples of how all that works. So embodied processing is a modality that myself and Matt teach. We believe empowering individuals with the understanding and skills to help themselves and others relieve stress and trauma in the body will change the world. So anybody on that path, we take a hat off to you and commend you, because it is the path least traveled. It's a difficult one. We spoke about empowerment. People are like, oh yeah, I do. I want to be empowered. That's great. It sounds like I'm going to have a wonderful life. But it's like you're empowering you to actually feel all the shit that you suppressed throughout your whole life. So it doesn't sound quite as attractive when we explain it like that. But my God, it's worth it when we stay on the path. All of what's included in the training there. If you want more information, just go to thecenterforhealing.com or Google Embodied Processing. It'll all come right up there. I might post a link in the comments after we jump off as well. Questions and answers before we wrap up. We've gone a little bit over time, so we might just take a couple. We've got one here from David.
I've got an appointment in about half an hour. Well.
Yeah. Let's just do this one, and we'll see if one other comes through. But yeah, David spoke about, I also feel that as a HSP, when my emotions are overloaded, I'm closer to flooding and anger. So HSP, for those who don't know, highly sensitive person. Dr. Elaine Aaron is probably the best one to look at her research around this. It's essentially meaning that around 15 to 20% of the population will be classified in this category of having a more highly attuned nervous system, which means we feel more. Most people that are drawn to this work, especially as practitioners and everything, are HSPs, like much more than the general population. They also go to more creative pursuits, like comedian, artist, that kind of thing. So basically this work is even more important for somebody who is a HSP, because like anything, I mean, things are a blessing and a curse. And because if we didn't have the capacity and skills and early on in life, certain circumstances happened, plus we're a HSP, we just tend to accumulate a lot more stuff. HSPs are highly correlated with mental illness and addictions. But when we start to do this work and start to work through it, my God, we can be powerful. Like the shit that we can do, all of a sudden, all of the things that we perceived as a curse can start to become a blessing. But like, I'm not going to lie, it's a tough journey when you feel a lot, okay? But so much worth it. Another one here, Matt, do you want to speak about this? What about sitting with terror? How do we hold space to keep someone safe when they experience terror?
It's one of those things that it's it depends on somebody's capacity. It depends on how well resourced someone is, because if someone's experiencing terror, the tendency is to fall into dysregulation, to kind of flood. So like dipping in and out of it really, really slowly. If someone feels supported, like touch can really help. Like if you've got terror, feeling contained, going like this, things like weighted blankets, anything that helps the body to kind of feel more regulated as it moves through, anything that, movement, running, shaking, all of those sort of things as well can really help. How do we hold space to keep someone safe when they're experiencing terror? Look, like it comes down to helping someone to feel held, to feel held and contained whilst they're experiencing it. And it's one of those things that, like, people need to work up to experiencing. If someone's just stuck in a state of terror, I would be focusing on regulating out of it, resourcing, finding safety, developing, more spacious, open sensations in the body, finding a safe place in their imagination they can go to, a safe person, maybe a teddy bear, something that can hold, something that can help bring them out of it, vagus nerve techniques, this one where you look up the basic technique, I think it is, but yeah, different eye movements, yawning, sighing, different breath, pranayama, breathing techniques. This is if someone's stuck in terror and can't come out of it, just to help turn the switch off, because the tap can be stuck on. And if the tap's stuck on, we need to learn to turn the tap off.
Yeah. We're always trying to, with this work, people speak about comfort zones, or it even applies to like flow states as well. It's like we want to expand our comfort zone, and so we want to push just beyond it, and then we can expand the boundaries. But if we stay in it, we're not going to grow. If we go way beyond it, it'll be too much and we'll get overwhelmed. So we want to find that little sweet spot, and we're kind of doing that emotionally with our clients. And as we work with clients, we get to know where, just the edge of their tolerance is and just beyond. But from a practitioner point of view as well, like obviously the orientation of all of you is welcome here. And then one thing that Matt and myself teach is attunement and co-regulation. And so maybe, and this is a big one with anger, right? And it can work with terror as well. But if I as a practitioner haven't worked through my own anger stuff, and I have difficulty holding it, then all of a sudden I'm going to go into a fear state when the client exhibits a certain level of anger. And the same with terror. If their terror makes me scared, now it's like a table tennis match of fear going back and forward. So that's like, and we're not going to be perfect at that. And sometimes sessions will show us where we maybe need to do a little bit more of the work. But ideally, if we can hold that real presence, we're talking about holding presence in this class for our own anger. But if we can hold the presence of whatever emotional state is in the person across from us, then they will feel energetically held, whether they consciously know that or not. And that's a big part of it.
That's a resource.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting a lot of comments here of people saying they're grateful. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for jumping on today. It's Good Friday here in Australia, so really appreciate you all jumping on. And that person from the UK, it must be like past 2 a.m. now. I hope you've been able to stick it out. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful Easter, everybody. For those of you that are tuning in and watching the replay, just put #replay. Any questions or comments, let us know, and we'll jump on at some stage later today or tomorrow, and we will answer those. Matt, pleasure as always, my friend.
Thanks, brother. See you guys.
Bye.